There is a woman in Osaka who has never had a bad day that started with a good morning. Not because the morning prevents bad things from happening. Not because the morning prevents bad things from happening. Not because the morning prevents bad things from happening. Not because the morning prevents bad things from happening. Not because the morning prevents bad things from happening. Not because the morning prevents bad things from happening. Not because the morning prevents bad things from happening. The difference is in how those things land. How the person encountering them has been prepared by the preceding 40 minutes to encounter them from a position of readiness rather than a position of reaction. The 40 minutes she spends before 8 o'clock are not a productivity ritual. They are not a morning routine in the sense of a program designed to optimize output. They are 7 things, done in the same order every morning, that have been producing the same quality of readiness for 11 years. Not because she planned it that way, because she discovered, somewhere in her 30s, that the mornings she approached those 7 things in their specific order were mornings from which everything that followed was measurably different, and she stopped altering what was working. And somewhere else right now, someone is waking up and immediately checking their phone. They do this before they have decided whether they are ready to receive whatever the phone will tell them, before the cortisol awakening response has run its course, before the brain has made the transition from sleep to the particular quality of wakefulness that the morning is designed to produce. They are reactive before they have had the chance to be anything else, and the specific quality of reactivity that the phone produces in the first minutes of the morning follows them through the first hour, and through the first hour into the day, in a way that most people have felt but have never been able to name. What if the quality of the entire day is determined, more than by any subsequent decision or event, by the 7 things that happen in the 40 minutes before 8 o'clock? And what if Japan has known this, not as a wellness philosophy or a productivity strategy, but as the ordinary structure of a morning, since long before anyone called it a routine? By the end of this video, you will know exactly what all 7 are. And number 5, the one that takes less than 5 minutes and that most people skip because it feels too small to matter, is the one that most people tell me immediately changes the quality of the hour that follows it. Stay with me, because the last 2 are the ones that make the first 5 work. Before we get into the 7 things, there is one piece of science worth understanding, because it changes what the morning actually is. The cortisol awakening response, the CAR, is one of the most well-studied phenomena in chronobiology. In the 30 to 45 minutes following waking, the body produces a natural surge of cortisol that peaks at approximately 50% above the resting level. This is not the stress cortisol that the wellness industry has been warning against for decades. This is the preparatory cortisol, the brain's own mechanism for mobilizing the cognitive resources required for the day. The KIAR prepares the prefrontal cortex for goal-directed behavior, sharpens attention, and produces the specific quality of focused readiness that the morning hours are uniquely positioned to provide. The quality of the CAR, whether it produces the energized, focused readiness it is designed for, or the anxious, reactive state that most people experience, is almost entirely determined by the inputs the brain receives in the 30 minutes it is running. A morning that begins with the phone begins the CAR with social comparison, news, notifications, and the particular low-grade anxiety of having committed to the demands of the day before having prepared to meet them. A morning that begins with the 7 things the woman in Osaka does begins the CAR with the specific inputs that allow it to produce what it was designed to produce. 7 things. Here is what they are. The first thing she does when she wakes is not check her phone. The phone is in the room. She does not restrict it, block it, or put it in another space the night before. She simply does not reach for it. For 30 minutes after waking, the phone does not exist in her practice of the morning. This is not a digital wellness decision. It is a cortisol decision. The cortisol awakening response, as described above, is running for those 30 minutes, regardless of what she does. The question is what inputs it receives. Research from Dr. Gregor Hasler at the University of Bern has found that morning social media use activates the stress cortisol response rather than the preparatory one, the brain encountering comparison, conflict, and the demands of others before it has produced the state of readiness from which those encounters can be met with equanimity. The result is a morning that begins in reaction rather than in readiness. There is also the psychological framing effect to consider. The first input the brain receives in the morning sets the lens through which the subsequent hours are experienced. A morning that begins with a news feed begins with the world's problems before the person has any of their own. A morning that begins with someone else's highlight reel begins with a comparison the person did not choose to make. A morning that begins with a work email begins with someone else's agenda before the person has established their own. The framing that the first input produces is not easily overwritten by the subsequent hour. In Japan, the morning has always belonged to the self before it belongs to anything else. Not as a philosophical statement, as the ordinary sequencing of a morning that produces a day. The first 30 minutes contain only what is internal: the waking body, the quiet space, the transition from sleep to the particular quality of presence that a morning is designed to produce. She picks up the phone at 30 minutes, not because 30 minutes has been prescribed, but because by 30 minutes the quality of the morning has been established, and the phone no longer has the specific power to alter it. The second thing she does, within the first 2 minutes of waking, is wash her face with cold water. Not a cold shower, not an ice bath, cold water on the face, for 30 seconds before anything else has happened. This is not an aesthetic practice, it is a physiological one. In Japan, the morning face wash, ideally cold, ideally immediate, is so embedded in the structure of the morning that most Japanese women do not think of it as a habit. It is simply what you do when you get up. The mirror, the cold tap, the 30 seconds of contact. The day begins here, at this sink, in this specific quality of wakefulness. The mammalian diving reflex, the automatic physiological response to cold water on the face and forehead, produces an immediate reduction in heart rate, an increase in parasympathetic nervous system activity, and a measurable reduction in the cortisol that the stress response produces. The reflex is present in all mammals and is among the most reliable vagal activation techniques that require no equipment and no practice. The cold water touches the face, and the body responds as it has responded to cold water on the face for thousands of years, slowing, steadying, clearing. More relevant to the morning, cold water on the face produces the specific quality of physical wakefulness, the alertness that the body recognizes as awake and ready, rather than the groggy quasi-consciousness of a body that has been dragged from sleep into a warm room, without the cortisol spike that caffeine produces. The caffeine-cortisol spike, arriving on top of the natural cortisol awakening response, produces a combined cortisol load that many chronobiologists now associate with the mid-morning energy crash that sends most people toward their second cup of coffee by 10 o'clock. In Japan, the morning face wash is as old as the morning itself. It predates the science that explains it. She does not know why the cold water works. She knows that every morning she skips it. The first hour is different. The third thing is the one that addresses a cost most people pay every morning without knowing it has a name. Decision fatigue, documented by Dr. Roy Baumeister at Florida State University in research that has been replicated across populations and settings, is the measurable depletion of cognitive decision-making capacity that occurs with each decision made. The capacity is finite and depletes across the day. Each decision consumes from the same pool. The pool does not distinguish between the decision to eat the same breakfast and the decision to accept or decline a significant professional proposal. Both draw from the same reserve. Most Western mornings begin with a sequence of small decisions before the first hour is complete. What to eat, what to wear, whether to exercise now or later, whether to respond to that email before leaving, what route to take, each one modest in isolation. Together, they represent a meaningful depletion of the cognitive reserve that the morning is supposed to be preserving for the day's actual demands. The traditional Japanese breakfast, miso soup, rice, a piece of fish, a pickled vegetable, perhaps a soft-boiled egg, is the same breakfast, or a variation of the same breakfast, every single morning. Not because the Japanese lack culinary imagination, because the predictable breakfast eliminates the first decision of the day. The pool begins full. The depleting does not start until the day actually requires it. She does not decide what to eat for breakfast. She makes miso soup. She has been making miso soup in the morning for as long as she can remember. The decision was made once, long ago, and has not been revisited. By the time she sits down to eat, the first 30 minutes have belonged to the self. The cortisol response has run on clean inputs. The cold water has activated the diving reflex and produced full wakefulness, and the decision pool is intact. The breakfast also feeds the gut microbiome. the fermented miso providing the bacterial diversity that previous videos in this series have connected to immune function, cognitive health, and the regulation of the inflammatory markers of aging. But that is a secondary benefit. The primary benefit is that she did not have to decide. The fourth thing takes 2 minutes. In Japanese homes, the futon is folded and stored after sleeping. The sleeping space returned to its daytime function as a living space. The bedding put away with the specific care of something that will be returned to that evening. The sleeping is complete. The space acknowledges its completion. The day moves forward on the basis of that completion, rather than on the basis of an unresolved loop that will remain open in the visual field for the rest of the day. The folding itself is brief and specific. The futon folded in its particular way, the cover smoothed, the pillow placed. 2 minutes at most. The care is not in the time it takes, but in the quality of the attention given to the task. The same full attention that Timai asks of the tea ceremony, applied here to the morning's first act. The thing is complete. The day can begin. The psychological research on this is specific. Dr. Charles Duhigg, in his study of keystone habits, the specific daily behaviors whose completion produces a cascade of subsequent productive behaviors, identified the made bed as one of the most consistent predictors of daily self-reported well-being and productivity. Not because a made bed is inherently significant, because the act of completing the first task of the day activates the specific dopamine response that primes motivation for the next task, and the next, in a chain that the Zeigarnik effect would predict from the other direction. The completed task closes its loop and releases the small reward that makes the next task feel accessible. The person who has made their bed at 7 o'clock has already proved to the particular part of the brain that tracks these things that they are the kind of person who completes things. She folds the futon. It takes 2 minutes. The day begins with one thing done. Everything that follows is a continuation of something that has already started. This is the one that takes less than 5 minutes, and that most people tell me immediately changes the quality of the hour that follows. Before she leaves the bedroom, before she enters the kitchen, before the morning has produced anything beyond the bed being folded and the face washed, she spends 5 minutes returning the living space to its neutral state. The cushions replaced on the low sofa, the books that were open on the table closed and stacked. The kitchen counter cleared of the things that arrived on it the previous evening and were left for morning. 5 minutes. The same 5 minutes, in the same order, every morning. The Princeton Neuroscience Institute research on visual clutter and attention, referenced in the focus video in this series, has a direct morning application that it rarely receives. The visual state of the home in which the morning begins determines the ambient cortisol load of the first hour. An unresolved visual environment, surfaces covered with things that belong elsewhere, spaces not returned to their neutral state, produces the continuous low-level amygdala activation that the arranged environment does not. The morning begun in an arranged home is a different morning than the one begun in the visual residue of the previous day. She does not clean the house in the morning. She resets it. The distinction is important. Cleaning addresses accumulation. Resetting prevents it. The cleaning happens in its own time, on its own schedule. The morning reset is not cleaning. It is the return of the space to the neutral state from which the morning can proceed without visual noise asking for anything. 5 minutes. The morning then begins in a visual environment that does not ask anything of the amygdala. And the amygdala, not being asked, does not respond. The sixth thing takes 30 seconds and determines the psychological direction of the day. Before the morning's activity properly begins, she writes one sentence, not a to-do list, not a schedule, not a goal. One sentence that answers the question, what is the one thing this day is for? Not the most important task, the one thing the day is for. The single intention that, if the day ended having produced it, would make the day feel complete. The sentence is specific and concrete, not be more present, but finish the first draft of the proposal before the afternoon meeting. Not exercise more, but walk to the station rather than take the bus. Specific, completable, observable. The physical act of writing matters more than most people expect. Research on implementation intentions, Dr. Peter Gollwitzer's work, referenced in the focus video, has found that the simple act of writing, rather than thinking an intention, produces measurably different outcomes in follow-through and resistance to competing demands. The written intention recruits the prefrontal cortex in a way that the thought intention does not. The writing makes the intention external, and therefore accountable, in a way that the internal intention is not. There is something the brain does with the act of writing that it cannot do with the act of thinking, a specificity, a commitment, a closing of the option of not having decided. In Japan, the practice of ichinen, the single concentrated intention, is present in the martial arts, in the tea ceremony, in the beginning of any work that requires sustained commitment. The morning is the natural moment for the daily version of it, not the grand ichinen of a life's direction, the specific ichinen of a Tuesday. She writes the sentence, she leaves it where she will see it. The day then has a direction from which it can be displaced by events but not robbed of its shape. The seventh thing, and the one that ties all 6 of the previous things together, is the same walk that has appeared in multiple videos in this series. Here it appears in its morning context, for the specific morning reason that its other context did not address. Morning sunlight, specifically the high-frequency blue light present in outdoor morning light in the first 1 to 2 hours after sunrise, is the primary signal by which the circadian clock is calibrated. Dr. Andrew Huberman at Stanford has documented the mechanism. The intrinsically photosensitive retinal ganglion cells in the eye send a direct signal to the suprachiasmatic nucleus, the brain's master clock, and this signal sets the cortisol rhythm, the melatonin rhythm, the sleep-wake cycle, and the cognitive performance cycle for the entire following 24 hours. A morning spent indoors under artificial light does not produce this calibration. The circadian clock drifts. The cortisol rhythm becomes irregular. The melatonin onset, which should occur approximately 14 to 16 hours after the morning light signal, is delayed or suppressed. Sleep quality declines. The cognitive performance cycle loses its daily peak. All of this from the absence of the morning light signal that 10 to 20 minutes of outdoor exposure would have provided. The 20-minute walk is not exercise. It is light exposure in the form most available to the human body. The optic flow, the visual experience of the world moving past as the body moves through it, quiets the amygdala in the way documented in the anxiety video. The BDNF produced by the moderate movement supports the neuroplasticity documented in the brain video. The cortisol reduction from the walk supports the telomere maintenance documented in the aging video. She walks for 20 minutes every morning. She has done so for 11 years. She does not know about the suprachiasmatic nucleus or the intrinsically photosensitive retinal ganglion cells. She knows that every morning she walks, the day is different from every morning she does not. 7 things. 40 minutes. The same order, every morning, for 11 years. No phone for the first 30 minutes. The cortisol awakening response running on clean inputs, producing the readiness it was designed for, rather than the reactivity the phone produces. The day belonging to the self before it belongs to anything else. Cold water on the face, the diving reflex activated, full wakefulness produced without the caffeine cortisol spike, the body alert before the day has asked anything of it. The cold water and the particular quality of clearness it produces, every morning, before the day has introduced its first demand. The predictable breakfast, the decision pool intact, the miso soup made without choosing, the first decision deferred until the day actually needs one. The morning eaten in the same form it was eaten yesterday and will be eaten tomorrow, the repetition itself a kind of rest. The bed made, the first task completed, the dopamine response priming the second, the day beginning with one thing done, rather than one thing unresolved. The futon folded and the day already underway in the way that matters most, with a completion behind it. The 5-minute house reset, the visual environment returned to neutral, the amygdala not asked to process what it should not have to process, the morning beginning in the space the morning requires. Not cleaning, resetting, the distinction preserving 5 minutes of every morning from becoming something it was never meant to be. The one sentence, the day given its direction before the day begins its work of erasing it, the intention written and external and therefore real. Specific and completable and visible in the place she will see it when the morning produces its first distraction. And the 20-minute walk, the circadian clock calibrated, the amygdala quieted, the BDNF produced, the morning light received before the artificial light of the day arrives to compete with it. She has not had a bad day that started with a good morning. She is not claiming the morning prevents bad things. She is simply reporting what 11 years of the same 40 minutes has shown her to be true. Tonight, before you go to bed, decide which of the 7 things you will try tomorrow. Not all 7. 1. The one that sounds most like the thing your morning has been missing. Begin there. The others will follow. If this changed the way you think about what happens in the 40 minutes before 8 o'clock, share it with someone who has been waking up feeling behind before the day has begun. They may not need a better day. They may need a better 40 minutes before it. Take care of yourselves, and I will see you in the next one.